What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I'm looking at the decks that are the top 5 on my list for Dallas Regional Championships 2020, which is coming up this weekend. Before we get into these decks, I want to shout out PotownStore.com. You can use code Celio for 5% off there on PTC geocodes. And also shout out to FlipsideGaming.com, where you can use code Celio, all caps, for 10% off on your next order $10 or more. So these are going to be my top 5 picks for the tournament as of now when I'm recording this video. I just want to make that clear. I do think the top 2 are the top 2 decks of the format, but 3, 4, 5 might just be my opinion, so you might have a different opinion on that. But like I said, my top 5 decks for the tournament, starting out with number 5 being Night March. So Night March hasn't had a lot of talk recently, not too much hype going around this deck. But there was hype going around it right before Richmond Regionals a few months ago, and Richmond Regionals had a similar meta where Turbo Dark was the top of the format, or at least one of the best decks of the format. Night March is a single prize focused deck, and I think that has a lot of merit right now since we have decks like Zorogarb, Turbo Dark, Pikachu ROM, Reshi ROM, Guardian. We have a lot of tag teams and a lot of GX-based decks that are getting results at League Cups and are getting hype for the tournament this weekend. So I do think being a single prize-focused deck definitely has its merits this weekend. And also Night March is kind of under the radar as well. But I'm going to do these pros and cons on the screen for each of the decks I'm talking about. So Joltik Electropower Marshadow GX on the screen, since Joltik is kind of the front man of the deck. You can use Electropower in this deck, and I definitely think you have to use Electropower in Night March now because of the power creep. So Pokemon just have higher HP now, so you want to use Electropower. And then Marshadow GX, you can use Marshadow GX to copy a Night Marcher from the discard pile and do double damage to fighting weak Pokemon. So early game, you don't have to burn as much resources to get a one-shot on like a Zoro Ninja or a Darkrai or a Sabletar or whatever. You can just use Marshadow GX, and sometimes all your Night Marchers are gone, so you have to use Marshadow GX. But for the pros for Night March, it's single prize focused, like I said, and it's high damage output for a single attachment, which it means that you are attacking as early as turn 1, and you can't really lose tempo. Now, the cons of this deck, it's pretty much weak to every type of denial and every type of lock. So it's reliant on abilities, it's reliant on special energy, and it's reliant on items. So abilities is probably the smallest thing here, since it needs abilities early to draw cards and whatnot. But after the early game, you can kind of get by on just Sycamore or teammates every turn. Reliant on special energy, there's no way getting around that. You need your DCEs to attack with this deck. Then reliant on items, that's also kind of something you can't really get by. You need your Battle Compressors, your Ultra Balls, your Versus Seekers for this deck. Now you can play Pokemon Ranger in this deck, so if somebody uses like Quaking Punch or Distort, or Noivern GX's second attack, which is escaping me at the moment, that denies special energy, you could use Pokemon Ranger so you can actually use those items or their special energy that turn. I do think Night March is very good. I think players have it in the back of their mind. I expect a few to make day 2, and it's something I'm considering now that we're a few days out from the tournament. Next on my list is Pikachu ROM. So notoriously, I'm not a huge fan of Pikachu ROM in Standard. I've never played it in Expanded either, but in Expanded it's very solid, and it has a really nice Full Blitz turn 1 success rate because of Max Elixir and Thunder Mountain and Cocoa Prism. In Standard, you don't have Max Elixir, and that's a huge difference. So Michael Catron made a pretty compelling argument for Pikachu ROM being one of his top picks for the tournament in my meta discussion video for Dallas that you can watch on this channel. And it made me think a little bit more about Pikachu ROM. I wasn't considering Pikachu ROM as a strong play for the tournament or a pick for myself up until this past week. You can play Jolteon GX or the new Electros that plays itself down as an evolution. They're both outs to Pyro or Plume if you're afraid of either of those. For my pros, I have that it's aggressive and the consistent turn 2 Tag Bolt. Tag Bolt's the main appeal for the deck. And then its cons is that it's fighting weak. So fighting weak can be a big deal because Turbo Dark the dark Pokemon in Dark are fighting weak, and so there might be fighting counters that Pika ROM takes collateral damage from. And then also it has poor matchups to single prize decks usually, but if those single prize decks play Shamans and Dedenes on their bench, then it's a different story. You could be fine. So when selecting a deck or testing a deck, players are looking to see what the Turbo Dark matchup is like. And Pika ROM can actually have a really good Turbo Dark matchup. You can get a turn 1 full blitz with a couple powers and take a knockout, and then turn 2 Tag Bolt to take 2 more knockouts, and then the game's just over from there. So if the game's over in 2 turns, it doesn't really matter how much damage your opponent's doing with Dark Pulse, or how much energies they can flood onto the board, or if Guzzlord's taking extra prizes off of your Shaman. You have just won by then. So the aggression of Pika ROM's really nice. Mr. Mime and Mew does not frequent Turbo Dark decks, so you don't really have to worry about them having a bench barrier. And like I said, I do think it can take some collateral damage from Fighting Weak decks, because Fighting Weak decks are targeting Turbo Dark. But one of the main fighting decks is Lucario GX, and that's still a GX deck that you can take multiple prizes, multiple knockouts with Tag Bolt. And you can play Flash Energy to negate your fighting weakness. So I do think Pika ROM's really solid, but I'll have to put some more time into it myself. It's not a deck that I play a lot, so I'm not very comfortable with it, but it seems fairly easy, and like I said, the aggression of the turn 2 Tag Bolt is just really, really powerful and expanded, since you can just kind of blow anything up, and you don't know what's going to be sitting across from you at the table in an expanded format. Next is Guardian at number 3. So I have a weak spot for Fairy Transfer Aromatisse. I've just always loved this card ever since it came out. I used to play the Fairy boxes when Aromatisse was in Standard. And I kind of regret not testing Guardian Aromatisse for Richmond Portland expanded format. So I definitely wanted to hop into it for Dallas, and early on it was probably one of my favorite decks. It can get overrun by huge one-shotting Pokemon like Reshiram, or even a Turbo Dark that gets set up extremely fast. So that's what's kind of holding me back from it. As well as the Spritzes could just get sniped when you're setting up your Aromatisse. But other than that, I think Guardian's very good. Its pros are that it shuts out most single prize attackers, and that's by moving your energy off with Fairy Transfer, playing a Max Pot or an Acerola, and then putting the energy back. It punishes overextending with Low Puff, so your Mega Lopunny Jigglypuff with Jumping Balloon. If your opponent benches too many GXs and EXs, you can one-shot anything with Jumping Balloon. Magical Miracle, you can put your opponent to a 0-card hand, and that just wins games there sometimes. And another thing that wins games right off the bat is a heavy count of Lab and Plant to shut off abilities, and then sometimes your opponent just cannot draw cards to get going. The cons I have for Guardian are that it's weak to Vileplume BUS and Pyroar, so you're out to Vileplume BUS and Pyroar is attacking with Fairy Wind from Aromatisse, or playing a Stealthy Hood in your deck for the Vileplume. The deck is pretty predictable and linear because it has one real strategy: just heal your Guardian or heal your Mega Lopunny Jigglypuff while moving the energies with Fairy Transfer, and eventually try to do a Magical Miracle to put your opponent down to a 0-card hand with Plant or Lab in play, and then you just win from there. And it's also pretty slow, so you can never have a turn 1 attack with Gardevoir Sylveon. If you go first, you're not having a turn 2 attack with it either, or like turn 2 dealing damage. You're not taking a knockout turn 1 or turn 2 with the deck. So that slowness in an aggressive format is something that I'm worried about, but I really love the deck, so I'd like to maybe become comfortable with it as my play by the weekend. Next, I've got Ultra Necrozma from Cosmic Eclipse. This deck was the first deck to get hyped for Dallas, overshadowed by Turbo Dark a bit now, but I still think Ultra Necrozma is very great. And one of the things keeping it so high on my list is that it has a favorable Turbo Dark matchup. Now, of course, Dark can even out the trade with their Guzzlord from Cosmic Eclipse, but the ability lock from either Garbotoxin or Silent Lab, in addition to dealing a lot of damage from a one-price Pokemon and discarding energy, it really can mess up Turbo Dark. So if you get an energy off their active, and you end them to a low count because they've already taken some prizes. Maybe you great catcher up something to 2-shot and they can't retreat it for free because they're ability locked. There's a lot of things that make the Turbo Dark matchup pretty nice. I also think it's kind of gatekeeping single prize decks because things like Hitmonwob and Buzzgarb just don't have the damage output to keep up with Ultra Necrozma when Ultra Necrozma is just one-shotting them for a single attachment. So my pros for the deck is that it trades favorably with most GX decks, and it has ability lock. Ability lock can be huge. The cons are similar to Night March. It's relying on special energy, it's relying on items, and it usually only has basic attackers. That's another bad thing about Night March, is it only has basic attackers. Basically, Night March, like I said, is weak to all kinds of locks and counters, and Ultra Necrozma is very similar there. But it's very good against the meta deck, so it's great against Pika ROM and Turbo Dark. Its Guardian and Mewtwo matchups are in the middle somewhere. But then, like, Egg Ral and Pyroar decks and Honchkrow decks, it struggles versus the lower in popularity decks. So I do think it's very, very good. It has a ton of burst damage out of nowhere for just 1 energy while locking your opponent's abilities, while discarding an energy from their Pokemon. So it is very, very strong. It's going to do well this weekend. It's going to be popular, and it's my number 2 pick because it has a good tag team deck matchup. Number 1, probably not a surprise, Turbo Dark. Even if you're not playing it this weekend, I think it's in everybody's considerations or in the decks they want to beat or the decks they think will do well. It's just going to be popular and successful, and it's the most hyped deck right now. Turbo Dark was also the most hyped deck for Richmond, I believe, but it fell off in Richmond due to people countering it with Buzzgarb and Night March. I mean, I shouldn't really say it fell off. It still got second place. It did very good. But people were switching off of Turbo Dark is what I should say, because they were switching on to counters to Turbo Dark or on to counters to the counters. And I don't see that happening this time for Dallas. I've been saying this in a lot of my videos that Guzzlord CEC changed things because you can use Red Banquet to take an extra prize card on single prizers. And then Weavile GX being a staple in the deck changed things because now the deck doesn't lose to Pyroar or Vileplume Burning Shadows. So the pros of Turbo Dark: it's aggressive, it's versatile, it has 3, 2, and 1 prize attackers, it has basic and evolution attackers, it has GX attackers and non-GX attackers. Some other pros, I mean, I could go on and on with this deck. Its damage output is insane. It doesn't rely on special energies. It has energy acceleration. Even if you needed the Weavile and it gets knocked out, you can use Dark Union GX to put it back onto your bench. The cons are that it's expected to be popular, and the general lists, like the stereotypical lists, are well known. So other than it being expected and obvious and like people knowing what the lists look like, it doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. Like, the deck can realistically beat most things. So I think it's high up there on a lot of players' lists. I do expect it to do well. I mean, even when it was countered heavy for Richmond and I thought the counters worked, it still got second place. So I 100% expect it to have several day 2s. I expect it to top 8, and it could very well win the whole tournament. So those are my top 5 picks as of now for Dallas Regionals. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to check out PotownStore.com and FlipsideGaming.com. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more content. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.